Greetings, everyone. Brad here with Mild Mannered EDC. Hope you're all doing really well out there. Today, we have another installment of a knife bartitsu. That's right. A bartitsu here on the Mild Mannered channel is basically our term for a knife comparison. So we're going to compare two knives. And these two knives, I think, are really worthy of a comparison. In fact, kind of carrying along that bartitsu name, the subtitle for this is Battle of the Double Ds. That's right, because these are two double detent knives, meaning they are not slip joints, they aren't traditional locking knives, they are opened and closed and held open and held closed simply by two detents. So interesting. Double detent knives have been around for a while, but they've definitely, I think, gained in popularity over the last few years. I can be kind of here or there on them, kind of depending on how they shape up. But they certainly have a niche within the, I think, knife community and sort of within knife preferences for collectors. So, and for just daily, everyday carry. So, all right, so let's talk about the two knives we've got on the table today for this Battle of the Double Ds. We have the Civivi Stylum. Yeah, this is a relatively new offering from Civivi. We got that there. And then the other contender is the Kansept knives Foosa. That's right, the Foosa. Okay, so interesting knives. They look pretty different on the table, certainly here in front of you, and in front of me. But they pair up pretty nicely on paper, actually. And so I thought, as I was working through the specs on these two, and I actually got these knives separately. I didn't have this particular comparison in mind when these knives came in, but as they came in and I started handling them both, I thought, wow, okay, these would make two interesting knives to compare. So anyways, I'll give you a couple points of context around these two knives, and then we'll get underway with this particular bartitsu. So Civivi Stylum, designed by Ferrum Forge. You can see, there you go, that Ferrum Forge logo. Ferrum Forge has worked with We Knives before, which is Civivi's parent company. I don't know if there's been another Civivi Ferrum Forge collaboration, but certainly We Knives and Ferrum Forge have worked together quite a bit. Let me know down in the comments, though, if there is another Civivi Ferrum Forge collaboration. And then the Foosa with Kansept is designed by Rolf Helbig, who, from what I understand, is just sort of a knife aficionado. I'm not sure that he's a kind of full-time maker or designer or anything like that, but that's sort of what I understand with him. Now, the Civivi will run you around $59. The Foosa will run you about $67. So they're within $5 to $10 of each other, depending on what retailer you might use or whatever. So I thought that was pretty comparable. So. All right, both of them manufactured out of China, by the way. Both Civivi and Kansept are Chinese brands. So there we go. All right, now, before we get underway kind of officially, let's do a few size comparisons just so you can see how these sort of fare up with other knives that folks might be familiar with, just so you get a sense of what we're dealing with here on the table. So I've just added a CJRB feldspar. This is the small feldspar. And then up here is my Spidey Rat, or Ontario Rat number 1, that has been modded, but the size remains consistent with a Rat 1. So that's where you can see, kind of they're in this middle to maybe a little leaning on the smaller side here with the Stylum, but they're very close in size. So ultimately, that's kind of what we're looking at. So, all right. Now, as we do this, we will walk through kind of a few of the specs, doing comparison. We'll talk about blades, actions, materials, ergos, carry, et cetera, kind of what we might do in a standard review. But we'll just go ahead and get underway with these two. All right, specs. On the Civivi Stylum, we've got a blade length here of 2.96 inches, an overall length of 6.85 inches, and a weight of 2.39 ounces. So very, very lightweight. And as you can see, it's a pretty slender knife when it's closed up, especially so. So very much a slender carry, if that's something you're interested in, very lightweight. The Foosa from Kansept has a slightly larger blade at 3 inches on the money, an overall of 7 inches on the money, and a weight of 3 ounces right on the money as well. So Both of them definitely, taking advantage of that ounce and inch. Both of them pretty lightweight, pretty easy carry. Um, I think that's, again, I think when you see that on paper, you start to go, okay, those two knives are actually pretty similar. So despite how they might look aesthetically, and that's what we're going to get into right now. So let's go ahead and talk about the blades on these two knives, and we'll start with the Civivi. So the blade on this Civivi is a flat ground stonewashed blade made of, I think you can see that there, 10CR 15CO MOV.
What the hell does that mean?
Right. I don't know what cousin or relative that is of 8CR, 9CR, or any of these others that we know out there. And in fact, this is the first knife I've had that I've handled, basically, that has that steel. So I can't really tell you all that much about it. I assume it's in the ballpark of 9CR and probably pretty similar, which is a perfectly fine steel. It's sort of right there in that, probably better than VG10, but maybe not as good as, a D2 or something like that in terms of edge retention. So there you go. Kind of, that's my guess. Again, that's purely a guess. I don't, I'm sure Pete over at Cedric and Ada or some other channel that does a lot of steel work could tell you more about that. Interesting blade, very sort of sterile, except for that small Ferrum Forge logo, as we talked about. And darn if it isn't slicey. It comes down to a really, really thin edge, making this a very, very sharp, very, very slicey knife. It didn't come super sharp out of the box. It definitely came sharp, but not sort of hair whittling sharp, which kind of surprised me based on how thin this is. So anyways, I don't know, something to think about, but definitely a pretty darn aggressive stonewash. We've seen this stonewash on Civivi before. It's almost more of a gray, looks almost like an acid etch or something, to be honest with you. It's not what it is, but there's a little bit of that. And you have a little bit of a mirror reflectivity there in the grind. So, kind of interesting. You have this sort of, you could call it a finger choil, I guess, and we'll talk about that a bit more. You could call it a sharpening choil. I don't know how well that'll actually work for a sharpening choil, but it's interesting nonetheless. And we'll, I don't know. It feels, I can't tell if it looks good or if it looks incomplete or like it's an error sort of, or something like that, as this, as the blank was being cut out or something like that. I mean, I know it was intentional. I know it's the design. Ferrum Forge loves their forward finger choils, but still, in this knife, it just looks a little bit weird, but it may have some more purpose for that. And we'll talk about that in terms of action and sort of carry. So there you go. You do have some jimping here on the spine as well. So that's what we've got with the Stylum. Now for the Foosa, you'll notice a much different blade, right? It's different in almost every way. It's flat ground, I guess, so that's similar to the Stylum, but we've got a compound grind here with a Tanto style blade. Very, very interesting. Now this one also is very, very thin, comes down to a great keen edge, and this one did come considerably sharper. It definitely came a bit sharper than I think the Civivi did, so I'll say that. They both are similar in blade stock as well. I'm sorry, they're both 0.12 in terms of blade stock, so pretty reasonable, I guess, for a knife this size, knives these size. The Kansept blade, also stonewashed, as you can see, a bit more of their sort of mirror-y kind of stonewash that they use, which I actually like quite a bit. So I think I prefer the look of the blade here on the Kansept in terms of the finishing more for the Foosa than I do on the,
Missed it by that much.
On the Kansept, or I'm sorry, on the Civivi. You'll notice the Kansept logo there. You'll also notice, I do this, 154 cm. So 154 cm, definitely a middle of the road steel these days. Maybe a little bit more towards the budget end when you consider all the steels that are out there nowadays. Like I said, I can't really compare it directly to 10CR 15CO MOV, but I can say I've had a lot of experience with 154 cm, and I like 154 cm. Not only do a lot of custom makers use it, but a lot of brands that we all like and respect quite a bit, like Protect Knives and others, use 154 cm quite a bit. So it's a good steel. It's great for everyday carry, perfectly adequate, but certainly isn't high end by today's standards. So there you go. Got a bit of the maker's mark here on the back, and that's it. No jimping whatsoever on the spine, but everything is actually pretty well chamfered. And I should mention that as well here on the Civivi, but again, stonewashing does a lot of that, so it knocks down a lot of those sharp edges. So there you go. All right, so that's what we've got here with those two as it relates to blade. Let's talk about action, because that's maybe part of the most interesting in terms of the double detent component of it. So with the Stylum, you've got a front flipping action, right? There you go, flip it right open. It does not really provide for that reach around effect.
Oh, brother.
Yeah, boy, we're just all kinds of innuendo here today on the channel, aren't we? Yeah, no, it doesn't really provide for that, as well as using it just in that traditional front flipper type action, whereas the Foosa is a very traditional just flipper tab. And it's a nice little rounded tab, so it's not something that sticks way out or anything that. It's pretty muted. I like the design here on the top to give you a little angle there to lay your finger and flip it open. Both of them come together very nicely past that first detent because they are both riding on ceramic caged ball bearings. So both of them riding on ball bearings. All right, now let's get to the meat of this, which is the tension on the detents.
The suspense is terrible. I hope it'll last.
So both of them have good opening detent, meaning the opening action is very nice on both of them. I actually think it's maybe a little more satisfying on the Foosa. So there you go. It's a little bit more satisfying opening the Foosa than it is the Civivi. However, I think on the close, I actually prefer the Civivi. Or Civivi, I guess. I don't know why I'm calling it Civivi all of a sudden.
Nobody does that.
So for the Civivi, the close is a bit more satisfying than the Foosa. The Foosa feels a little loose. I don't believe, and that, let me just get right into that. I think the detent is a bit better on the Civivi than on the Foosa. And when I say detent, double detent, which detent, whatever, the detent, the tension of the detent, the second detent, whatever, is a bit better on the Civivi than I think on the Foosa. The Foosa, you can get a lot more, if you're trying to close it, you just saw it right there. You get a lot more bounce, right? You get that bounce back. That's much more common on this one. Even if you're not closing it very hard, you can still get that little bounce there. But it closes just fine. Nothing to complain about. I noticed, however, that the closing action on the Civivi was much more consistent in terms of just pulling it right back in and having it rest directly into the scales. So while I think just overall the acoustics and everything are a bit better with the Foosa, I think the detent is dialed in a bit better on the Civivi than on the Foosa. So anyways, but again, I think those are a bit of personal preference. You may like the feeling of one or the other. What I will say is it's much easier to break the detent on the Foosa than it is on the Civivi. They're both a bit easy, but I think, yeah, there's a bit more tension on the Stylum than there is on the Foosa. So that's another thing to continue, especially when one of the concerns with double detent knives, right, is the fact that there's really no locking mechanism there holding them open. So as you're cutting and doing cutting tasks, that pressure is going to keep the blade open. But any other kind of lateral movement or any of that, kind of moving from a different direction, and you break that detent and it comes closing down on you. Not super different from a slip joint, but oftentimes slip joints can have a much stronger back spring to keep them open a bit better. And I do think if these were slip joints, these would both be on the very weak side of slip joints, right? So anyways, that's kind of where I'm feeling that. I'm kind of giving the Civivi, the Stylum, a bit of a win there on the detent, even though I think from an overall action standpoint, I find the Foosa a bit more pleasing just in terms of kind of feel and aesthetic. So I don't know, maybe I'm splitting hairs there or making that more convoluted than it needs to be, but that's kind of how I feel. So that's what we've got here with the actions on these two knives. Now, let's talk about materials. Both, again, very similar. Both utilizing micarta. So you've got the Civivi micarta here on the Stylum with the stainless steel liners, stainless steel clip, and I think that's a micarta backspacer. It might be plastic. Or maybe G10, but yeah, maybe that is G10 actually, now that I'm looking at it. But yeah, it could be a little bit of a micarta. I don't know. I don't know, actually. All right. Now, the Foosa, same thing. You've got a micarta there. You've got a little bit of a micarta backspacer. Definitely micarta on this one. Stainless steel liner, stainless steel clip. Neither of them have any weight relief within the liners, but they're both pretty lightweight, so I don't know that they definitely necessarily needed that. But that's what you've got there with, and then you've got stainless steel hardware, both in the pivot and the screws, and like I mentioned, on the clips. So there you go. Okay, ergos and carry. So from an ergo standpoint, definitely a much slenderer on the Stylum holding that. I don't know. It's a little bit slender. It makes you want to choke up a bit more, which again gives you more opportunity to break that detent. You do have this forward finger choil, which I think is pretty comfortable, but your chances of sliding up onto that are going to be pretty high, considering both how slender this knife is and sort of how non-committal sort of the choil is. It's very, very minimal in terms of choil there. So, I don't know, use at your own risk, I guess, with that kind of thing. Whereas with the Foosa, because it's a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker in hand, it feels a little more substantial and you feel like you just got a bit more grip on it. And because of this flipper tab, you've got the ability to sort of maybe hold that open a little bit. You feel it kind of closing on you. You can kind of pop it back open, which I think is good because this, like I said, has a bit of a softer detent than the Stylum did. So anyway, something to think about there. But in terms of ergos, I kind of think, weirdly enough, and normally I think Ferrum Forge actually has really excellent ergos. I think I kind of prefer the Kansept in terms of just doing the work because, again, I think it's just a little more substantial in the hand. And maybe if you have a smaller hand or more slender, carrier or hold or whatever, you might prefer the Stylum, but I think purely for me and for how I feel with my hands, I think I prefer the Foosa. Now, both of these have a missed opportunity in terms of being ambidextrous. One of the beauties of a double detent knife is the ability to be ambidextrous because there's no lock, right? You just flip it open, especially these are both flippers or front flippers, whatever, they're both flipping actions. Neither of them have a reversible pocket clip. That's a bummer. That would have been easy to do, and neither of them did that. So I think that's a miss for both of these knives, and I would have liked to have seen that. I think the clip is better on the Foosa, personally, not only the way it looks, but also the way it feels in hand. This one on the Stylum digs in just a little bit and is a little darn tight. And I'm not a huge fan of clips that come off on that 90-degree angle. Whereas the Foosa has, one, it's got some milling in it, which I think makes it look nice, but it's also got a bit more flexibility. And I like how it's like I said, milled down to be a bit of a ramp there. So again, two knives, very, very similar, but with enough nuances to make them different. Do I prefer one over the other? It was really hard. I was thinking a lot about that. I think in the end of the day, since I've owned these knives, I've gravitated more towards the Foosa. And maybe it's because I like cats, and this is named after some kind of Madagascar cat. Maybe that's what pushed me over. I don't know, whereas the Stylum feels like a made-up Latin word or variation of stylus. But all joking aside, I think it just the feel, both the carry and the feel in hand was a bit better using the Foosa than the Stylum, in my opinion. I think they're both fine knives if you're looking for double detent, but keep in mind there is a difference in the way they feel, difference in terms of detent and action, etc. But slightly different in terms of price, pretty darn similar there. So there you go. That's the battle of these two double Ds. I hope you've enjoyed this. I know it's been a longer video, but doing two knives, it's also sort of like doing two reviews. So I appreciate all those that have hung in there from now. Let me know what you think, if you've handled either of these, or if you prefer one or the other. If you disagree, agree with my take on this, I'd love to hear down in the comments. And if you have enjoyed this, throw this video a like. But a thumbs down is fine too, right? It's all fair here on YouTube. So anyways, thanks so much for watching. Be safe out there. Be mild-mannered to one another. And all the best.